On the line with us is our old buddy, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, the co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books, most recently, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. Prof. Wolff with two Fs over on Twitter. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program. What the hell is stagflation? I remember this word from the 80s. And what does this mean to the average person? And are we experiencing it?
Let's go back in back order. We are experiencing it, and the predictions of most people looking at the situation is that it's going to get worse before it gets better. Stagflation is a messy word that is really born out of smashing together two other words. The first word is stagnant, and the second word is inflation. And that's the clue. What it means is having at the same time a stagnation in terms of no job increase, factories not humming along as they should, a kind of stagnant economy bumbling along on the one hand, with rising prices of goods and services on the other. It used to be thought that you wouldn't have rising prices unless somehow too much money was chasing after too few goods. So we were told that that's what we should expect to understand an inflation. Then it became clear that we've had inflations when there was a high demand. We've had inflations when there's low demand. Obviously, that link was broken, and we admit as much with this term of stagflation, because what we have today is an economy that is not growing and one that is suffering a very bad inflation at the same time.
I thought our economy was growing.
No, our economy is not growing. This is a, how do I put this and stay within the bounds of polite discourse? The people in power need to present an economy that's in good shape, getting better, and all the rest of it. And so they do. When the Democrats are in, they do. When the Republicans are in, they do. When the Republicans are out, they are skeptical, and vice versa. What we have now is an economy in very serious problems. In fact, to be honest with you, I've never seen the American economy as hobbled by problems and as limited in the available solutions that I see now. It's a remarkable accumulation of difficulties. Nobody disputes that there's an inflation, kind of hard to do that these days with the overwhelming numbers. But when you look at the actual production decisions being made today, you can see that everywhere there is great uncertainty, hesitancy about making a commitment. Really, no business in its right mind at this point is going to take chances because it's too uncertain. The political situation abroad, the political conflicts here at home, the uncertainty about our elections, and then all the economic problems. It really is too much. And when that happens, we know that we're in for troubles with our economic situation. Indeed, the only number that the Biden folks can point to is the unemployment numbers. The number of people measured as not, as not employed, basically, is historically small. But the truth of it is, Tom, that that's mostly because people have been leaving work. Our labor force participation remains below what it was before the pandemic. And likewise, it's like going to a doctor and asking for a diagnosis. If all the doctor does is look at one variable, for example, your temperature, and bases the entire statement, oh, you're in great shape because you're 98.6, you'd never see that doctor again. You have lots of numbers to look at before you reach an assessment. The constant reference to the unemployment number is a cherry picking of very complicated statistics, which, if you look at all of them, is an economy that's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, it seems. And this is not limited to the United States. I mean, the World Bank just slashed global growth numbers. The inflation, at least according to the headline I saw in Financial Times day before yesterday, European inflation is 8.1%. Here in the United States, it's around 6.5%. This is hitting the whole world. What are the things You know, I remember from the 70s and the 80s that the stagflation that, you know, remember Jerry Ford with his whip inflation now buttons, his win buttons and all this kind of stuff. The thing that was driving it back then was high oil prices that were the consequence of the, you know, the Arabs cutting off our oil both in 1973 because we supported Israel in that war, and then in 1979, it wasn't the Arabs, it was the Iranians cutting off, well, their oil got cut off because the Shah of Iran fell. That oil shortage drove an increase in oil prices, and oil prices just echo through everything because everything had, you know, everything, even products that had nothing to do with oil have to be transported with oil, you know, or packaged with oil, whatever. So what is driving this worldwide stagflation, and what are the major risks on the horizon? And do you think, for example, if Joe Biden goes over to Saudi Arabia and kisses the butt of the crown prince, and then he raises, you know, oil production back up above that 2.2 million barrel a day cut that he had negotiated, that Jared Kushner had negotiated with him in 2020, and oil prices start to drop, will that be enough to help the worldwide economy recover?
I don't think so, not even close. I think we're looking, as I said before, at an accumulation of problems. One of the reasons we have stagflation, excuse me, is because we have divided the country into a very small number of rich people and a very large number of people who are in deep trouble in terms of what they can afford to buy. You're not going to get a consumer-driven long-term uptick because we don't have the people to sustain that demand. Wages are not going up anywhere near enough. Debts are already too high. They can't borrow more. I saw a very alarming statistic that consumer debt in the months of March and April of this year, the latest that we have, jump up. People are trying to cope with the inflation by going deeper into debt. That's exactly what I mean. You're solving one problem by aggravating another one. Right. Here's the second. No one knows whether the current spate of rising oil and gas prices is going to be over soon or not soon. All kinds of decisions have to be made that cannot be made rationally because we don't know where the basic cost of our gas and oil is going to go. Number three, and I'll stop with four. Number three is this war in Ukraine, or more to be accurate, it isn't the war, it's the sanctions program that has led to every single producer engaged in foreign trade wondering, should I incur all the great expenses to go away from what we have been doing to accommodate these sanctions, or will I spend a ton of money only to have the sanctions undone by some negotiations later this year or early next year when this whole war is over? And they're not going to move until that issue is clarified. And here's the one most Americans have a hard time understanding. The United States doesn't play the role in the world economy that it did in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. We are not the dominant economy with no challenger, which we were then. We have not only the People's Republic of China as a major competitor, and let me underscore, we haven't had a major global competitor for a century in this country. We are facing that, and a whole world that is rethinking its alliances, its loyalties, because of the changed position. And that puts the United States in all kinds of constraints as to what it can do. And all corporate executives, American and non-American, are calculating and trying to stay ahead, and as a result, hesitant to move. And that's why the economy is dull. And then you have the overhang of all the money created in the last 20 years. The stock market isn't booming anymore, so that money is going into the inflation that we see, bidding up the prices of whatever is scarce and hoping to keep your money growing that way because the rest of the economy is stagnating.
Wow. Wow. Does, inflation allows governments to pay off debts with cheaper dollars or cheaper, euros or wands or whatever it may be. And presumably it does the same thing for consumers, although, consumers are paying much higher interest rates to begin with. Is there any upside at all to inflation? Is inflation in any way curing any of these problems that you have delineated?
I don't think so. I mean, you're quite right. Inflation is always good for a debtor and bad for the creditor. That's the way the game is played. So no question, the inflation eases the burden of pre-existing debts. But the problem is we have a population that is borrowing money like there's no tomorrow. And as a result, the better effect, if you like, of inflation that cheapens your existing debt is offset by the fact that, as I gave you the statistic a minute ago, people are taking on more debts. And remember, in the last 20 years, because interest rates were brought down to next to nothing, every corporation in America that had any kind of economic problem, whatever that problem was, knew that the quickest, fastest, and cheapest way to deal with your problem was to go out there and borrow all that fresh money at those terribly low interest rates. And they did that, which means their level of debt now is enormous. And while the burden of that is reduced by an inflation, as they have to pay off those debts, they're in no position not to roll the debt over. In other words, to borrow more to offset what they have to pay back. And when they borrow more, they're going to have to pay the higher interest rates, and there negates whatever gain they might have gotten from the fact that inflation cheapens their old debts. It would only be good if there weren't new debts to load up on, but the very difficulty of the American economy means we have to keep loading up in a very dangerous spiral.